Hello, and thank you for joining us for this lesson on chimpanzee conservation. This is the first lesson that we are making available as part of our new curriculum packet. And the curriculum packet consists of 10 different chimpanzee-based lesson plans, and it's now available on our teacher portal on our website under the Learn tab. You can get in touch with me to do this lesson live with your students and to have a virtual field trip on chimpanzee conservation if you're interested. Feel free to email me at mhume, M-H-U-M-E, at projectchimps.org. Without further ado, let's begin. My name is Megan Hume, and I am our event coordinator here at Project Chimps. Along with events, I also develop and oversee all of our educational programs. That right now has more to do with virtual field trips and webinars and different options to connect with students and with our community virtually versus in person, considering we are all still in the midst of this crazy COVID pandemic. Most importantly, we at Project Chimps love to come up with different ways that we can interact and still share our love with chimps, our love of chimps with our community and of course with students. My love of Project Chimps began back in 2017, the moment that I learned about Project Chimps. I was very surprised, like many people are in our area, to learn that we had a chimpanzee sanctuary basically in my backyard. So I began first donating to Project Chimps in the fall of 2017. I then began volunteering with Project Chimps in 2018. For 2 years, I worked in our kitchen. I gave tours. I helped with events. I started writing a lot of the curriculum that I've developed as an employee. But I spent 2 years really trying to do as much as I could throughout the property, and then was offered the job of event coordinator in February of 2020. I love my job. I love the chimps. And most importantly, I love being on a team of people where everybody is very dedicated for one sole purpose, and that's for the chimps. We all work day in and day out to make sure the chimps have the best lives that we could possibly give them. So just a little bit about Project Chimps. Our mission is to provide lifelong exemplary care to chimpanzees retired from research. Project Chimps is a 236-acre sanctuary in the Blue Ridge Mountains created specifically to help chimpanzees formerly used in medical research. We're about an hour-and-a-half north of Atlanta, snuggled in a beautiful little area of the North Georgia mountains. We started transporting our first chimps to the property in 2016, and we've been bringing those chimps all from the New Iberia Research Center. And they're a research center that is associated with the University of Louisiana, and we have a deal with them to bring all of their chimps here to our property in North Georgia. This is an overhead view of the habitat, and we call this the Peachtree Habitat. And it is a 6-acre habitat, and it's split into 2 3-acre sections. You can see a little bit of a fence going through it here. And we have different houses or villas that the chimps live in. We have the Cedar Tree Villa, Dorothy, Joe, and Tilly Villa, our Chimps Ahoy Villa, the Harmony Villa, and then the McGrath Family Chateau. And this is where we have 2 different families of chimpanzees that live. Here's a picture of the inside of their villas. On the left, we have our vet, Dr. Silver, and she's interacting with some of the chimpanzees inside our Cedar Tree Villa. And this was the most recent villa that we had murals painted on all the walls. So we really do our best to try to make sure the inside areas are as pleasing and welcoming as they can possibly be for the chimps. Over on the right is our facilities employee, Lucas, and he's working on creating some new climbing structures for the chimps inside our chateau. And you can see here that we don't just think about left and right and front and back, but we really think about going high up as well, being that chimps love to climb and explore different areas. We try to give them as much as we possibly can for them to climb on and play on. We definitely spend a lot of time thinking about the chimps' diet and try to offer them all sorts of different healthy foods. We do keep them on a vegan diet here at the sanctuary. They get all different types of fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds. This is Joseph in our kitchen with sweet potatoes. It's also fascinating to see that chimps love all sorts of different things. They'll eat an onion like we eat an apple. They love eggplant and squash, all sorts of different foods. And then in addition, we do also supplement with some chimp chow, which has some nice vitamins for them. Daily enrichment is something we also really put a lot of time and effort into. So here we're not only thinking about the caloric intake that the chimps need, but we're thinking about their mental stimulation. In the wild, chimps would spend about 70 to 75% of their time foraging for food. So we want them to have to work for it a little bit. So on the left, we have one of our caregivers, Beverly, and she created this little wheel where we can put little tasty treats inside each one of those water bottles. And then the chimps have to find a tool and they can fish out those tasty treats from the other side. On the right, you'll see a couple chimps at one of our man-made termite mounds. And we have one of these in each one of the habitats. And while there's no termites in there, on the other side, there's PVC tubes. And we fill those tubes with jams, applesauce, things like apple butters and fun things like that, but different yummy mixtures. And we try to change it up and keep them on their toes a little bit, but some different options so that they can then find a stick and use it to get in there and sample the tasty treat. We do different types of events and field trips. We have 4 on-site events per year where you can have the opportunity to come and meet the chimps. 2 of those are very kid-focused. They are Chimps Rock in April, and then Chimp or Treat, which is generally the weekend before Halloween. And then we also do 2 open houses that we call our Discovery Days, one annually in May and one annually in September. And then without further ado, we will dive into our topic of chimpanzee conservation. As we go through this presentation today, we will try to look at 3 different things. We will recognize the major threats that wild chimpanzees are facing in Africa. We will learn about chimpanzees and related conservation efforts. And we will help to inspire the next generation of conservationists. So one thing that I like to bring to light is that chimpanzee conservation is conservation for all of the great apes. When we think about the natural environment that the chimps live in and the things that we could do to help protect the chimps and help protect their environment, it's very similar as far as things that we can do to protect all of the great ape species. Preserving their habitat also comes along with preserving a lot of the other species, both plants and animals that live in those habitats. So really, even though we're focused here on chimpanzee conservation, it is a bit of a broader picture as we look at conservation in general. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about the Endangered Species Act. First off, chimpanzees were listed as a threatened species in 1976. It was then not until 1990 that wild chimpanzees were listed as an endangered species. And we specify wild chimpanzees here because this is where the split listing of chimpanzees began. And they decided to differentiate wild chimpanzees versus captive chimpanzees. So with this split listing and with this differentiation, wild chimpanzees were afforded the protections that came with being an endangered species, but captive chimps were not. So in 1990, even though wild chimps are now endangered and protective, the captive chimps that were already in labs and in captivity were not given these same protections. Therefore, different types of testing were allowed to continue on them. We do know, of course, that there is no difference between a wild and a captive chimpanzee. They are the same animal biologically, physically, in all ways. So, of course, captive chimps should have been given the same protections at that time. Chimpanzee conservation. So overall today, it's estimated that there is somewhere between 175 and 300,000 chimpanzees left in the wild today. And this is a map to show you some of the areas that the chimps live in, the western part of Africa, and then this equatorial area of Africa. Now, back in the day, maybe about 100 or so years ago, and of course longer than that, all of this area was once more of a more continuous area of habitat that the chimps lived in. And we're going to talk about some of the different things that have happened that have contributed to the fragmentation of their natural habitat. So some of the different threats that are facing the chimps. Habitat loss is a big one. And when we talk about habitat loss, we'll talk about logging, mining, and agriculture. We then have the bushmeat industry, which is poaching, the illegal pet trade, and of course, different diseases that they have faced over time. So habitat loss is one of the largest problems that the wild chimps face. And not only wild chimps, but this again, we can look at other great ape species and other plant and animal species in general. There's a lot of deforestation going on. There's a lot of full on cutting down the trees of different areas. And in some areas, these trees are used for specific purposes. In some areas, these habitats are cleared for agriculture. We're going to get into some more of those specifics in just a moment. But there's also a direct correlation between human population and habitat destruction. As the human population continues to grow, there is more and more of a demand for different resources. So unfortunately, habitat destruction increases as the human population increases. And one particularly bad aspect of habitat loss is slash and burn. And this is an approach that is often taken when habitat is cleared, and they will go in and cut down the trees and burn everything to make space for agriculture or whatever it is they want to do in the area. And when they do this, it of course kills any species, plants, animals, insects, any species that were in that environment are destroyed. But then along with that, there's mass exodus of carbon dioxide into the environment. So whereas we know that global warming is a major issue, trying to pay attention to the climate and what is happening to the climate, this definitely contributes to global warming and some of the increases in temperatures in the climate that we are ultimately trying to battle against. So logging and agriculture. First off, chimps are very dependent on old growth trees. When you think about a wild chimps population, they could have, 100 or so chimps in their community. So when they go out looking for food during the day, they need to find some large trees and lots of ripe fruit in order to sustain them. Chimps love figs, so they're often out looking for fig trees. And if you can think about how little a teeny tiny fig is, they need a lot of figs in order to satisfy their different communities. So chimps definitely dependent on some of these large growth trees. Besides food, they also nest in the trees, and chimps will make a new nest each night. So they need fresh areas that they can travel to and always be finding different trees that they can be making new nests in. And what happens as well with logging and agriculture are not only the direct impact that the trees are cut down, the habitat is destroyed, their food source is blatantly destroyed, but also roads are often built to these areas that they're trying to get to. And even if the trees and the habitat along those roads aren't cut down, there's big changes that divide the habitat on either side. So it cuts off some of the populations as far as being able to move about as freely as they once used to, and being able to interact with some of the other populations. Now, sometimes when they interact, there's little fights and there's battles for territory, but interacting as far as females, when they're starting to become mature, they want to find other communities that they can go to ultimately find their male to start reproducing and doing things like that. Now, some other big issues that are talked about a lot today are the impacts of palm oil. And I chose a picture of a little orangutan here because they have almost been driven to the brink of extinction because of the palm oil plantations in Sumatra and Borneo. And since they've taken over a lot of the places in Borneo and Sumatra, a lot of these plantations are now looking to Africa to have more space to continue to cut down the trees and grow more palm oil. There is more and more of a demand for palm oil. It helps to preserve different things and it helps to smooth out different things. One of these main things that it's used in is peanut butter. So if you want to make a difference, one easy little thing that you can do is look on ingredients. And if you see palm oil used in something that you're going to buy, don't buy that. Peanut butter, different candies, but you can check the ingredients and try to stay away from palm oil. Mining is also something that has a large impact on the chimpanzee populations. The demand for different types of precious metals One of the big things that is being mined for nowadays is a product called coltan, and it's mined all throughout the areas of the equatorial Africa where the chimps live, and it is a precious metal that is used in cell phones. So if you have a newer phone, if you have a smartphone, chances are coltan, it was used in that phone. So we want to be mindful of how many phones that we have. Maybe next time you need a phone, you buy a used phone instead of a new phone. And maybe you don't need to upgrade to a new phone just because a new option is out. Maybe you can stick with your older cell phone for just a couple more years. And when you don't want your phone anymore, how can you recycle it? How can you reuse it? But us trying to be mindful of the resources that we're using and ultimately try to decrease the amount of demand that there are for coltan and other things that we have to go out and mine from the chimps' natural area. Now, in addition to the habitat destruction that comes with mining different issues or mining different products, there is also other things that come along with mining. And one is the impacts from the workers. When the workers come into the different areas where they're mining, they need to eat. So unfortunately, it's often the workers for some of these different industries that contribute to poaching and bushmeat. We're going to get into that in a moment. But then there's also pollution as a byproduct of mining. Based on how they go across, how they mine the actual product, there could be different effects of air pollution, water pollution, and pollution into the soil and the natural habitats in those surrounding areas. So definitely mining can have a lot of negative impacts for the wild areas that the chimpanzees live in. Bushmeat and poaching, and this is a picture at a market, which are sometimes the places that chimps and other types of wild animals can end up if they succumb to poaching. So bushmeat is basically poaching. It's going out and killing some of these different animals. It's illegal hunting. So hunting that, yeah, it's illegal hunting. Sometimes snares are used, and snares are little traps where if they stick their foot or their hand inside it, it tightens. These are extremely inhumane because the animals don't just die immediately from the snare. If they're caught in the snare, they will sometimes try to chew their arm or their foot out of the snare, so they might then lose an appendage as a result, or they might simply starve to death over the course of a couple days, or bleed to death because of the snare and how it's cut into them. So definitely not something that is good for the population at all. And luckily there's even nonprofit organizations that dedicate themselves specifically to going out to some of these wild areas and doing nothing but removing snares, getting rid of them. And then something else is that chimps are easy targets. Some of the poachers have said that since chimps are so large, they're easy to see, they're easy to spot. So they're simply an easy target. So whether it's people who are working around mining, working around some of the palm oil plantations that are going out simply in need of food, or people who know that some of this bushmeat actually brings a hefty price at some of these markets. There's, all different aspects of people who choose to illegally hunt some of these animals. And unfortunately, sometimes it's simply because they have no other way to feed their families and they feel like they don't have a choice. And we're going to talk more about that later as well. So CITES, this was a law that was developed in 1975. The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. And it requires that anyone exporting chimpanzees or moving them between countries must obtain a special permit, which justifiably can be difficult to obtain. So the main thing that they tried to do with this law is they wanted to start monitoring all of the different chimp movements. They wanted to see when chimps were being sold and who they were being sold from and who they were being sold to. Now, even though the permits were especially hard to obtain, they kind of did this on purpose. They didn't want to make it super easy. So unfortunately, that means some people would turn to faking their permits and getting around the lengthy permit process. Now, one downside of this was because they made it more difficult to take chimps from the wild, it did increase breeding programs. So for a lab that now could no longer easily buy readily supply of chimps from the wild, they started more so increasing their breeding program so that they would have their own supply of chimps, not being dependent on getting them from the wild anymore. So some ups and downs here. It was definitely a great law intended to protect the chimps, but like many laws, sometimes some flaws and some loopholes. Illegal pet trade. So it's of course now, based on that law, illegal to take a chimp from the wild, but unfortunately it does still happen. So yes, resist the cute and cuddly, because of course we can all look at this cute little face and say, yes, baby chimps are adorable, but baby chimps do not belong in houses or homes. Baby chimps belong with their mothers and with their families in the wild. So taking an infant chimpanzee out of the wild is not only dangerous, but it is unethical. So sometimes people will go into the wild and try to find the baby chimp simply to resell the chimp, but sometimes the chimps end up in the illegal pet trade as a byproduct of the bushmeat trade. And how this would happen is if there were hunters and they were out and they see a chimp and they shoot that chimp for bushmeat, and then upon closer inspection, they realize it was a mama chimp and she had a little baby with her. They might then decide, oh, there's also profit to be made here. So they would then possibly try to sell that pet or sell that baby chimp into the pet trade. But any way that you look at it, the illegal pet trade is definitely a bad thing for chimpanzees. Chimpanzees do not make good pets. Diseases have affected the chimps in numerous ways. Ebola has had a large impact on chimpanzees over the years, and it's estimated that 75% of chimps that get infected with Ebola will die from the disease, and that's absolutely detrimental to their populations. The Jane Goodall Institute has done some great research with both chimps and gorillas, and what they have found is that approximately 1/3 of the gorilla and chimpanzee population has been lost to Ebola. So definitely this has been detrimental to the chimpanzee and great ape populations. In 1997, some of the chimps in Gombe started developing mange, and this is sarcoptic mange. And in that picture there, you can see that the mange, and what it is, it's a little mite. It's a teeny tiny little bug that gets down into the skin, and it can spread during grooming. If you can picture the chimps close to each other, grooming each other, it's the perfect opportunity for that mite to be transferred from chimp to chimp. So unfortunately, it's very easily transmissible. And what it does is it really dries out the skin. It gives them this flaky, really uncomfortable, scratchy, itchy skin that just makes them extremely uncomfortable. And it's fairly hard to treat. So this was a large problem with the Gombe chimps back in the 90s. Now, talking about respiratory illnesses, chimps are very similar to humans. We know our DNA is very similar, part of the reason why originally it was justified to do medical research on chimps. But we also now do know that the little bits of genetic differences and the little small differences that we have between us and chimps are actually quite large. So thinking about respiratory diseases, our respiratory systems are very similar to chimps, and it is hypothesized that yes, chances are chimps could get COVID if they were exposed to it. Now, we don't know this for sure, and there haven't been any cases of chimpanzees getting COVID, but there was recently the first cases of COVID crossing into other great ape species with the gorillas at the San Diego Zoo testing positive for COVID. So we can only assume that now in the midst of this pandemic that yes, chimps can also get COVID simply because they do get a lot of similar respiratory issues. And these things can be passed back and forth across the across the species barrier. Since we are all different great ape species, we imagine that unfortunately chimps would be able to get COVID. So very similar to how we both respond to different respiratory illnesses. And because of that, we want to keep our chimps safe. So when we think about our volunteers, when we think about people coming on site, we have a lot of precautions that we take. All of our staff and volunteers have had not only different vaccines, but we all get flu shots, we all get annual tuberculosis tests, but we definitely try to make sure that we are vaccinated for and doing our best to protect the chimps from getting any diseases ahead of time, because of course we want to keep the chimps safe. Now, as we're talking about chimpanzee conservation, I think it is also important to talk about human welfare. And we're going to get into Jane Goodall in just a moment and talk about some of the work that she's done. And she really has kind of paved the way for this idea that when we're looking at trying to conserve a species, we do need to look at the humans living around where those species live. And we can also make a lot of forward progression when we talk to some of the different industries that are involved in the area. So you can see on the map to the right, there are all sorts of different great natural resources that are found throughout Africa. And when we think about the fact that chimpanzees live all through this area, that they also find all sorts of other resources, well, how can we go about potentially being mindful of the species that are there, being mindful of the environment, but still finding a little bit of balance and finding ways that you can still get to some of these resources. So bringing human welfare into it. When we think of chimpanzee conservation, we must also take into consideration the people living in the surrounding communities around the chimps. And if we have the idea that through conservation, we can improve the lives of the human communities around the chimps at the same time as improving the lives of the chimps, then maybe we can get someplace a little bit quicker. So also something else to take into consideration is by combining conservation efforts with the local industries, in addition to the individuals in the surrounding areas, then we can work on improving the economy of these areas and hopefully make it so that, the lives of individuals are improved as we're trying to help protect the lives of the chimpanzees. So there are some different groups that are working towards promoting chimpanzee conservation. We've got the Jane Goodall Institute. We're going to talk about some different ecotourism programs, the African Conservation Foundation, or the ACF, and then we'll also mention the Wildlife Conservation Society, or the WCS. So we can't talk about chimpanzee conservation, of course, without talking about Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall first went in her young 20s out to Gombe to start researching and interacting with the chimps, to start observing them and watching them in their natural environment. But even way back then, part of the initial goal was finding ways to protect the chimps from extinction. And she worked on establishing different species conservation programs, and definitely, like I mentioned earlier, started to really pave the way as far as bringing in some of the local communities and sharing this idea that with conservation, we need to look at people and humans as well as the animals that we're trying to protect. Still today, Jane Goodall is continuing to travel. Possibly COVID has slowed her down a little bit, but otherwise she is always on the move, always running, and always speaking out and doing things to share her love of chimps, to share her love and her passion for the communities around the chimps and for the work that she's done, in hopes that people will continue to share her energy and share her passion as we continue into the world. So the Jane Goodall Institute, they've got three main things that they look at. First off, they are an institute that focuses on community-centered conservation efforts combined with efforts to advance science and technology. And their mission of the program is to support wildlife research, educational programs, and conservation. And by protecting chimpanzees and inspiring action to conserve the natural world, lives of animal, people, and the environment are all helped. So they really help to bring together some of these different ideas that we've been talking about as far as the approach to chimpanzee conservation. One program that has been developed is the Roots and Shoots Youth Program. And this is an amazing program. And first off, it is a youth-led program. And I think that's fantastic. We know that for any of these efforts, we need to influence the younger generation and hope that they really get involved as well as they start to grow and then go to college and get jobs and get out in the world. So youth-led organization, and they are now in 100 countries all over the world. environment. They're in classrooms, they are part of nonprofit organizations, but really working to make a difference in the world of conservation. And you can see their website there. By all means, if you are a teacher, or even more so, if you are youth, see how you can set up a Roots and Shoots program in your area. So some different ecotourism programs. Now, of course, we all can't go out and see chimps in their wild habitat, but if it is something that is on your bucket list, you want to make sure that you're using reputable companies. You want to research the companies that you use when you travel and make sure they are going through lengths to not pollute as they travel, to get involved with the local populations, and of course to be respectful of the animals when it comes time to get close to them or have opportunities to view them. So we have our own version of an ecotourism program here at Project Chimps, and that is our Chimpcation program. And these are programs where you can come and you can spend 1 week with us on the property. And in that 1 week, we try to get you all over the place and really give you a great idea of overall how our sanctuary runs. From working in the kitchen to help to prepare some of the chimps' foods, helping in facilities, but definitely just trying to give people a great overall view of all the different things that happen on property to help the chimps have their sanctuary and have all the opportunities that they have. So then we have the African Conservation Foundation, or the ACF. And they're really doing great things by working with local communities to grow their own trees. And the idea of encouraging local communities to grow their own trees is kind of twofold. First off, it is giving them their own food. So you are directly growing trees, fruiting trees that you can then eat the fruits off of those trees. So giving people an easy way that they can sustain themselves and grow food for themselves and for their family. And the idea here is by growing their own food, it would help people to become more independent, give them food so that they're not running out of food, and then with that, reduce the chances that they would feel forced to go out and contribute to poaching or hunting some type of bushmeat. So trying to put the trees and the work in the hands of the local communities and helping them to be independent, grow their own foods, and to then interact with the world around them in a little bit more of a humane way. And we also have the Wildlife Conservation Society, or the WCS. And they're a great organization, and they're really trying to work with some of the game wardens in different areas to protect chimps and other species as well. They are working to combat habitat loss, and they not only work with different governments, but they work with some of the different industries, and they try to talk to them as far as how they are using the resources. So they might go in and talk to the logging companies about how they are cutting down trees, and maybe work with them to see if there's some more ethical approaches that could be taken. Something else that they're doing that is fairly fascinating is they have different labs set up where they are collecting feces and urine samples from the chimps. And from these samples, we can actually monitor infectious diseases and different things like that. And then what can you do? Of course, there's things that we can all do. So maybe you don't need that brand new iPhone. Maybe you can make your iPhone last just a little bit longer. Maybe you decide to buy a used cell phone instead of a brand new one. Read ingredients. Don't purchase anything made with palm oil. Look at candy, look at your peanut butter, but there's all sorts of other, unfortunately, products now where they're trying to sneak some palm oil in there. So be a smart consumer, read ingredients, and anything that has palm oil in it, simply leave it out, don't buy it. If you want to take the next step, you can send that company an email and let them know you're not buying their product specifically because it has palm oil in them. We can definitely speak with our money. You can recycle your old electronics and buy used when possible. Try not to support any baby animal photo opportunities. Whether you're traveling or at a zoo, baby animals deserve to be with their mamas and their siblings and in natural habitats. So we don't want to encourage people to spend money for these little baby animal opportunities where the babies are taken away from everything that is natural and comfortable to them for our own photo. So you can also do the research. If you are going to travel, choose a reputable ecotourism company when you travel. And even if it's not an ecotourism company, try to be mindful when you travel. If you do cruises, look at the environmental impact of the cruise companies that you choose to go with. But do the research and take the time and just try to make smart decisions. You can help plant trees or pollinator flowers in your area. And this helps with overall conservation, even if it's in a small scale in your backyard, by planting more trees, by planting things that flower for the bees, for the pollinators, you're still helping to increase the biodiversity in your area. So never underestimate the impact that you can make, even starting small. You can also pick up trash or organize a local wildlife cleanup area in your area, wherever you live. Get your neighbors involved, get your friends and family involved. But again, don't ever underestimate what you can do. Even if it's just you and your cousin and an uncle or something out on a Saturday morning, you can take a couple plastic bags with you. In any place you go, try to leave it just a little bit cleaner than what you found it. And of course, we can all work to inspire the next generation. It's all about the kids. If we teach kids to make smart decisions, it's just going to become natural to them. If we teach them to be mindful, teach them to read labels, teach them all of these other things, and those things are just a part of their natural choices, then it's fairly easy versus trying to target people who are a little bit more set in their ways. So of course, when we're looking to change, when we're looking to improve things, kids, it's on you. You've got this, you can do it. And this is a great quote from Jane. Every individual matters. Every individual has a role to play. Every individual makes a difference. The least I can do is speak out for those who cannot speak for themselves. Only if we understand will we care. Only if we care will we help. And only if we help shall we all be saved. Thank you, Jane. So it costs approximately $22,000 a year per chimp to give them everything that they need from their food, housing, medical care, and enrichment activities. And I sure do hope that you enjoyed this program. And if you did, it costs just $7 a day to feed one chimp and $3 a day to provide enrichment for one chimp. So for just $10, you can provide all meals and enrichment activities for one chimp for one day. Please consider an annual chimp sponsorship as a gift for $250 or monthly at $23. You can check out our website to learn more about how you can visit the chimps at one of our events, field trips, or other upcoming adventures. And if you haven't done so already, please check out our website at www.projectchimps.org. And most importantly, thank you for joining us. This chimpanzee conservation lesson is now available as a virtual field trip. And like I said at the beginning, feel free to send me an email if you are interested. We can definitely interact live with your class if you're a teacher, and we would absolutely love to meet some of your students. And most importantly, at Project Chimps, we think about chimp choice and always making sure the chimps have the choice to do what they would like with their days. And I'll end you with one of our quotes. It's their time to live. Thank you.